Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to bring Marc Ian Barasch into the space. He will be speaking on the topic of amazing what one seed can grow. It is a journey to the heart of regeneration. And Marc is the founder of greenworld.org, as well as a noted author and filmmaker. And we will be welcoming Marc in right now. Hi, Marc. So much for being here today.
Good to see you. Thank you for inviting me. It's really nice to sort of play to, in effect, a hometown audience, people who are on the journey of consciousness and also on the journey of activism on behalf of Gaia. And I think these two things are essential for us to sort of be true to what needs to happen and be open to what is wanted. Because of that, I'm going to actually try to weave in some of the aspects of sort of consciousness adventures, dreams, etc., that have led me on my journey to becoming a practitioner of regeneration in the world. And I'm going to do this hopefully as just kind of an example of one person's journey that I think will probably resonate with a lot of you. So it will, let's just launch in. And I'll say about myself that primarily I was a media person before I got involved in this. And I edited New Age Journal, Natural Health, and a bunch of other magazines. Then I got cancer and had to leave that for some time. And it was a journey into the underworld. It involved a lot of dream experiences and healing experiences and trauma and kind of transformation and some kind of coming back to the world after one of these kind of shamanic journeys to the underworld. And it taught me something about how any state, physical, mental, spiritual, global, can be somehow regenerated, and that it's not always just our doing. In fact, normally it's not, although we do what we can, but there's always this sort of hidden X factor of what we might call the whole or the universe, or however we want to look at it. And that in crisis, that becomes very prominent. As I think a lot of us know, and as all the myths and stories of these descents into darkness and back into light show. And this is where we sit today as a planet. And I think a lot of us, having gone through the pandemic, I know for myself, a long haul COVID journey. And I've sort of been locked up in my apartment here in Berkeley for the better part of 9 months. So the world is in this evolutionary bottleneck moment where we've gone into this dark place, and we're sort of about to, I think, reemerge into some kind of light. So I hope that this talk will kind of deal with some of those issues. And I wanted to start with a journey through a dream that I'd had that was about, I guess, kind of the tree of life. It says host disabled screen sharing, Genevieve. So I have this whole screen that I'd like to share, but it's not letting me do it. So that's a technical problem. I will just keep talking, and maybe Genevieve, if you can, in the meanwhile, restore the screen sharing, that would be great. So anyway, I'll just tell this particular dream because I think it has relevance. And in the dream, I had been given a beautiful tree that was really the most magnificent tree I think I'd ever seen. Leaves were multicolored, and it stretched to the sky, and it was sort of a tree of life. And then all of a sudden, in this sort of visionary experience, all of the leaves began to fall off the tree, and it was kind of horrifying. It seemed as if it was dying. And I looked at the roots of the tree, and I saw that it really didn't have roots, and that somehow this tree was fake. It was not only dying, but maybe it had never quite been alive. And nothing I could do could restore it. So it was a very sort of devastating vision. But at the end, I was leaving with a potted, looked like a potted tree. And I felt this little kind of office plant was a very poor substitute for this magnificent tree I'd had, but at least it was real. And I went to a dream group that I was attending then, and I brought this dream because I couldn't figure it out. And what I had felt about this little potted tree was that I had to water it every day, and what a nuisance that was. And somebody said, well, what's wrong with something you have to water every day in order to keep it alive and pay attention to it every day?
Thank you
And
so much, Marc, for your patience. Just wanted to let you know you can screen share now.
oh,
My
very good.
apologies for that
Okay,
earlier.
thank you. Let's try that again then and see if I can share the screen. So is that working? Yes, I hope so. So the point of this being that it became a kind of a hallmark for me of how important the dailiness is, that we have this whole sort of magnificent civilization that we built, and it looks wonderful and beautiful, and it sort of imitates the tree of life, but it's actually killing the tree of life, and it doesn't have roots in the earth. And the thing that's needed is actually to pay attention to, what's in our hands, what's around us, the dailiness of our relationship to each other and to the earth. So that became sort of something I've referred back to for the last 20 years. And during that period of time, I wrote a bunch of books, and in particular on dreams and healing, and got very deeply into the idea that really, by studying cases of remarkable recoveries and spontaneous remission, that anything can be healed within reason anyway, that conditions that seem to be hopeless, devastation of the body and of the landscape both. It was in a lot of the dreams I had, the body and the landscape were shown to be the same. I think we know the micro and the macro are not really separate. And so writing these books and going through this process of meeting people who had healing and examining the world of dreams really revealed a sort of this different layer of life to me. And at the same time that I had gone sort of deep within into this writing process and study and contemplation, I was always an activist. And I was trying to bring the media world that I knew into service to the planet. So I, for example, was given an opportunity to do a show around the first Earth Summit by Ted Turner, and it went out via CNN to 2 billion people. And it basically said that the ice caps were melting, and our emissions of carbon were at fault, and our obsession with the market rather than the actualities of the earth, which underlies all value, was what was at fault. And it was really, for 1992, such a radical message. This was around the first Earth Summit, that all the sponsors refused to advertise on the show, and it was kind of an uninterrupted, here's the big microphone and talk to everybody. However, it didn't really have much effect because media is media, can change minds and hearts. But I felt sort of frustrated, realizing that maybe it had an effect that I couldn't see. But here was this crisis coming at us like a freight train, and we weren't dealing with it. And I'm sure a lot of you have felt this over the years, being ahead of the curve and seeing what was happening and doing what we could, but not enough. So ultimately, I wrote a book on compassion, and it also changed me a great deal. Meeting people that were living a compassionate life and made me remember my Buddhist vows to follow the Bodhisattva path and to sort of renew that idea of a life of service. And in this case, the book did have some effect. It helped to spawn the Compassionate Cities movement for the Charter for Compassion, which is in 400 cities now. And there was a film that came out called I Am by a director named Tom Shadyac, Hollywood director. But again, still media. And after I wrote that book, I fell in love, met kind of the love of my life. And I decided, animated by this feeling of love, which I think everybody knows tends to sort of ripple out toward the world. It's usually not just confined to the romantic dyad. And I just felt like I don't want to go back in my room and write a book for 5 years. I want to celebrate life and be in life. And at one point, my girlfriend asked, well, I don't understand, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm really trying to not do. It's an old Taoist trick, but watch this space. I'm going to stay open. I'm going to ask how I can serve and see what arises. And I had gotten very interested in sort of kairos and synchronicity, the sort of nonlinear way that life can unfold when you're open, when you're sort of not collapsing the wave function, as it were, into a particle, but all possibilities are open. And this figure of kairos is very interesting to me because it's kind of everything all at once, rather than the linear time of chronos. And this was not an abstraction to me, although it may sound a little bit academic. It was sort of pointing to a way to live. And I decided that that was how I was going to proceed with my life. Thenceforth, I was not going to particularly make any plans beyond try to do some good, show me how to do that. And in the course of this sort of walkabout, I met a man who had been doing agroforestry around the world, just purely happenstance. And I was enthralled with this. I'd never heard of it. I didn't realize that there was a way to take care of the environment and take care of people at the same time, that the environmental movement theretofore had really been focused very much on conservation, but not on people or on renewables, but not talking about how the whole picture was put together. And I began to get this idea that maybe there could be something called green compassion that would include people and planet, a formulation we hear a lot, but I would say back 10, 20 years ago, it wasn't really the main event in environmentalism. One thing led to another, and I was given a ticket to go to Ethiopia. And I learned about agroforestry there and about what people had been doing for centuries, if not millennia. Obviously, agroforestry is the earliest form of agriculture, and combining trees and fruits and herbs and what the plants that are under the earth, and looking at this as a whole, and treating it as a whole system that we can nurture and nurtures us at the same time, and is co-evolving. And I learned about a agro-ecology program that we wound up funding, that we called Bees and Trees, where people planted Kaliandra and Grevillea trees, which had these beautiful blossoms that pollinators liked. And therefore, the pollination of the tribe's honey hives would be augmented, and they would get a greater harvest, but they were also regenerating the land with an agroecology system of trees and crops. So I began to get the idea from them, learning from them, that the regenerative approach was really win, 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 that everything done right, everything prospers together. And that actually is an ascending kind of collaboration that somebody yesterday said is really infinite, really has no limit. So I decided that I would just start some kind of organization, really just very kitchen table, and having no idea what I was doing, but I thought Green World would be a good name. It sort of was obvious. And I came up with a slogan, which sort of characterized the way I felt about my life and felt that maybe aspirationally things would unfold. And it was plant a seed, be a seed, see what happens. It's amazing what one seed can grow. Because being in Ethiopia, I could see that, out of a few seeds, these entire systems grow. And that in fact, when you do agroecology, when you do restoration and regeneration, a lot of species come back that maybe haven't even been seen in the area of degraded land that's being regenerated, that as these systems return, plants return, dormant seeds begin to spring up, species, animal and bird species that haven't been seen suddenly seem to find their way back there. So and of course it also grows the community, it grows the village, it grows the whole system. And I began to understand that this has been not only happening for millennia, but it had been recently in a process of rediscovery, such as this project in Niger, where people were on desertifying land, overpopulated, all the development agencies gave up and left. But there was seen on satellite imagery that there were these patches of green, and nobody knew quite what was happening, so they went to investigate. And it turned out that people had rediscovered the ancestral gao tree, and they'd realized that they'd been told by the European agriculture methodologies, excuse me, to cut down these trees and plant rectilinear fields of crops. And they stopped doing that, and they rediscovered the crops that used to be planted around the gao trees, and they literally turned back the desert and reforested 7 million trees. And wanting to emulate that, we did a series of kind of pilot programs from Ethiopia to Mexico's San Juan Atzingo forest, where the sacred oyamel trees have been cut down. And we wanted to help the last Tlawika-speaking village to regenerate the forest. We went to India and collaborated with people that were doing village sanitation and planted trees along with that, because trees grow with anything and go with anything. And we did it in the Philippines and in Jordan. And I began to realize that having also in the interim worked with the UN Forum on Forest Secretariat, that a new discovery had been made, that there were actually 5 billion acres of degraded land that had been identified that could be restored. This is not the Sahara. This is degraded land capable of restoration. And I realized that this would be something that could basically save the world. And that, of course, there are people, usually poor people, living on this land. And among, they are often the 600 million smallholder farmers that are either practicing biodiverse perennial agriculture or agroforestry, or whose ancestors, and often recent ancestors, use these systems, and maybe sometimes the communities have forgotten. But it seemed to me that if this could be supported and in some cases reintroduced as a methodology, that not only could land be regenerated and poverty alleviated and food security increased and communities made more healthy in every way, but it could also sequester carbon in a terrestrial carbon sink. This idea, as some of you know, was not much in favor back 20 years ago, but now is being pretty widely recognized and actually is generating a lot of excitement. So I sort of set out with a lot of hubris to see if we could create kind of an umbrella organization to foster regeneration, which again, not many people were talking about. And I think like a lot of us, I sort of felt I was one of the only ones doing it. I didn't realize that, like any emergent phenomenon and anything that in a sense Gaia wants and is in the zeitgeist of healing, the healing field, let's say, that a lot of people were making this discovery or rediscovering it. And of course, a lot of people were just doing it. I also, in the course of these travels that I was making, I also was in Berlin, and I came across the work of Joseph Beuys, who was a conceptual artist who also co-founded the Green Party, so had a very profound effect on the world. But Boys was really primarily an artist. And it was very interesting to me to see somebody who was interested in consciousness and art, who had actually created a sort of, in Bucky Fuller's words, a trim tab movement that has had an enormous effect on the world, and particularly on European governments and their environmental policies, and how advanced a country like Germany really is now toward moving toward a zero carbon economy. And I sort of delved into his life and writings a little bit, and discovered he was proposing an extended concept of art that he called social sculpture. This was a piece he did in Kassel, where he piled a bunch of oak trees in front of the government building and planted oak trees. And those oak trees were planted eventually from their acorns all over the world. And this is what he said, that art is this evolutionary, revolutionary power that can dismantle the existing social system and build a social organism as a work of art where every human being is an artist and is acting from a position of freedom and learns to determine the other positions of the total artwork of the future social order. And this is something that we, I think, are collectively doing. But I was thrilled to discover an activist that also talked about art and consciousness and the holistic state of mind that entails, because it was encouraging to me, as someone who had mostly been a writer and an artist, to think that maybe that frame of mind, that way of looking at the world, could be applied to real global problems. And in fact, I concluded that it's sort of what is really most needed right now, and that the people who have this sort of wider sense are the ones who are needed to get the environmental movement and really the world out of its silos, and to be able to not only look at things holistically, but act holistically in the way that the great environmental poet Wendell Berry talked about, where he said, we have to solve for pattern. We have to start with an understanding of the whole, and then act from there and look at everything upstream, downstream, all inputs and outputs, and solve for that. Not just for single factors, not just for one so-called sustainable development goal. I think sustainability, if I can editorialize for a minute, is really an old model, and the successor model is regeneration. As an economist I know said, sustainability is not the operating systems. Regeneration is the operating system. Sustainability is the outcome, the output. And I think that, again, we're moving in that direction. And we're realizing that if we can restore the amount of soil organic matter and its carbon content, according to scientists like Dr. Vatan Lal of Ohio State, simply increasing the soil carbon content by 2% could offset 100% of all greenhouse gas emissions going into the atmosphere now, and draw them down in Paul Hawkins' terminology. I don't deny that this is controversial, and the science is sort of catching up to some extent with the hope, but I think there is a lot of good science indicating that there is a possibility of a massive terrestrial carbon sink to draw down so-called legacy carbon, and in the course of that, doing all the other good things that I think all of us at this meeting are already doing. And this is a statement from Professor Eric Tonesmeyer at the Yale School of Forestry, where he says, terraforming our planet into a perennial food-producing paradise may be the only way to avert climate disaster. I think that we are all, despite our hope and acting our hope in the world, realizing that the alternative really is disaster. And we're right smack in the middle of it, and we're at this inflection point where we're either going to make it or we're not. Other examples of what he's saying, this is the Shinyanga Desert of Tanzania a generation ago, and this is after restoration of 500,000 hectares, and ultimately 1 million of new agroforestry. Again, community agroforestry turns out to be extraordinarily important and powerful. especially when it's replicated and scaled. But if we want to talk about large scale and whether scale is possible, some of you may have seen this already, of the famous example of the Los Plateau, which admittedly was done by the Chinese command and control system. So they were able to mobilize people at a level that we in the West really are not able to do yet. Maybe we did with the Civilian Conservation Corps during the Depression. But I want to show it as an example of what can happen, because it's really quite dramatic. Hold on just a sec, if I can. So it really shows that this can be done. And anybody that says that it can't scale, I think really needs to just look at those 20 seconds of footage. So in order to just sort of try to do my little bit after working in 9 other countries, doing these sort of learning projects and pilot projects and planting some millions of trees, and feeling that, yes, it can be done. I started a small organization in Kenya purely by chance, and I won't go into how that happened, but let's say it was, again, Kairos, that I wound up in Kenya. I didn't have any particular connection to it. And we started in a very small office, and just by improvising, we began to create all sorts of regenerative sort of arms of this central practice that we had of planting trees. For example, it turned out that the fellow on the right had been a school teacher. And I said, could you start school programs? So, and I wanted to start them in a way that would inculcate values, not just be eco-education, which it was and is, and that would be regenerative education. And we would just sort of iterate it as we went. What would whole person, whole community, whole planet education look like? We wound up being in now as many as 100 schools, but 80 schools. And we're now educating, eco-educating, and 20,000 students per year. And these students plant trees, probably about 2,000 per school. And they learn ecology hands-on. They learn this ethos, and they become global citizens. They feel that they're global citizens by identifying with Green World Campaign. So this is sort of a small, almost like a club at these schools, but it tends to take over the curriculum. You will notice in this image that this boy is holding essentially a potted tree. Now, when I had the dream that I described at the beginning of this talk, I had no idea what I was looking at. But 10 years later, suddenly I'm involved in potted saplings. So it was really extraordinary when I finally realized that. And I think that's how life often unfolds, when you are sort of attentive to, in a sense, what the universe wants, a question I try to ask myself a lot. I think that if you're attentive, there are answers. We have worked a lot with kids and a lot with the schools, because the schools turn out to be centers of innovation. They become centers of community education. We educate tens of thousands of farmers there as well in regenerative techniques and in agroecology, and introduce appropriate technologies like rainwater collection systems, which enables kids to grow food on the school grounds. We've created youth elder programs where the youth help the elders to restore the sacred kaya forests, which are the remnants of the great coastal forests of Kenya and are biodiversity hotspots. And the elders transmit to the youth the sort of spiritual ecology and their learning and their understanding of what a biocultural approach to conservation and regeneration really is. So this has turned out to be an incredible project. And now with the pandemic, the elders are teaching some of their knowledge of medicinal plants as well. So and the children are receiving this continuity of the transgenerational understanding of how humans and the environment have coexisted. And I just want to add that, of course, these are biodiversity hotspots because everything was sacred. And because things were sacred and the elders were in charge, you couldn't cut down the trees, you couldn't hunt the animals except in a sacred way. You had to preserve the herbs. Now, over time, economic factors of the trees being worth more cut down began to take over, even in these sacred forests. So this restoration work is really a key and a trim tab and an acupuncture point for the entire community and for that matter, the region. The youth have also done their own peace movement because we teach conflict resolution techniques. And they came up with this Trees for Peace movement during one of the elections where there was a lot of threatened violence. They made up their own slogan, which was plant trees, harvest peace. And that began to spread in this kind of rippling, radiating way that regeneration as a force tends to spread and healing tends to spread. Again, this idea of infinite possibility. So there was a group in the Pungu watershed, which is a devastated area that looks like this, that heard about the Trees for Peace movement and said, we want to join. We went there, we started a school. We wanted to help them to regenerate this absolutely devastated land because the children said, our grandparents have told us that this area used to have a huge river and it used to be all forested and filled with animals. And we don't understand what happened, but we want to try to bring it back. As
Marc,
things go.
I want to come in for one moment. Thank you so much. This is an incredible presentation. I'm hearing that if you can just press play on the presentation, then it should go into full screen mode.
Oh, I understand. Yeah, unfortunately, I need to sort of do it this way because I think I'll get lost in places. Let me try to do it more because it's the only way I can see my little, thumbnails. But anyway, so this is the community of Pungu. I was saying as things go, I don't know, Fred Disney, and he said, oh, I'll hook you up with the Disney Worldwide Conservation Fund. They were just finishing up a particular fund. They had a little bit of money left over, $25,000, pretty much just handed to us. And we were able to create this entire project in the Pungu watershed that began to restore that area and planted 250,000 trees. We didn't do it, obviously. The communities do it. And what happens is they get very inspired. And this is not a transactional relationship or the kind of quasi-extractive relationship that foundations and charities unfortunately often have with these communities. First of all, we really don't pay ourselves. This has been pro bono. I mean, it's babysitting money at best. And I decided to do it that way deliberately. The whole thing, by the way, started with, I mentioned the film I Am that by this director, Tom Shadyac, and he just decided one day in the very beginning of Green World Campaign to hand me a check for $100,000. And that's, all of this came out of that seed. Over the years, it gave me two years runway to sort of create this. But after that, money's kind of just trickled in, and we get these grants at about this level, and have managed rather miraculously to keep going. And I'd say plant between 10 and 100 times more trees than a lot of very well-funded foundations managed to do. And it's because we simply work with the communities, learn from them, and are really doing nothing but sort of facilitation often and education. And it's long-term. We worked with these communities now for 10 years. So we have found that these eco schools projects are a potential scalable and replicable system that affects communities incredibly once you just plant this little seed. It is amazing what seeds can grow. You can't see this map. It's, I realize, like a lot of tiny dots, but the green dots are our schools, and the rest of the dots are what's possible. Just in this region of Kilifi and Miani in coastal Kenya. So if we were funded, to get back to that, we could scale what we're doing 100 times and really make a huge dent. We have made something of a dent already. We've won awards from the Kenyan government. We planted 4 million trees, close to 4 million, all well monitored and evaluated with a survival of 75%, which is kind of unheard of. And it really comes again from people understanding themselves to be stakeholders. We're not paying people to plant this tree here, and then we're going to see if they plant it and give them a little more money. It would be nice to pay people better of course, to do this work. But we find that even on our highly leveraged way of working, people do it simply because they want to. A friend in Kenya told me because you're in the long haul, in for the long haul, and the communities know you're not just trying to spend donor money, but you want to transform lives and ecosystems. And you'd have this slow cook, as he called it, engagement based on empathy, generosity, and trust. That's why it works. That's the secret sauce. And I am actually obviously kind of proud of it and humbled by it that we've been able to get anywhere with the tiny staff we have. One of these fellows in this picture, very tragically and sadly, was actually killed defending one of the community gardens, killed in front of his family. So the level of commitment under in great hardship in these communities living on degraded land on the front lines of climate change is beyond humbling and sometimes really heart and gut wrenching, but it also incredibly inspiring of hope and belief that this kind of approach can work. We've introduced women's health clinics. And these have been, again, very successful as sort of educational, as well as community building exercises and providing real health services. And now in the pandemic, have become centers for education about COVID and dispelling of myths, and hand washing stations, because the schools are now closed. So we're using the schools for that purpose. And for information about nutrition, the women in the lower right are holding moringa trees, which I'll talk about more in a minute. We also have been trying to do media. And again, I could tell a lot of stories about how I have sort of pulled this off. And if it sounds egotistical to say obviously it takes a village and a lot of people are involved. But the fact is that since we can't really pay a staff, Green World Campaign World Headquarters is kind of me. And I just have to constantly be open and to trying to make whatever magic can be done, and also obviously, be very penny wise. So this project came because I used to go to New York, and I would visualize what would happen if Times Square, instead of advertising everything that was destroying the planet, could be turned into a rainforest. All the screens could suddenly be a rainforest. And I would tell people this, and I had no way to pull this off. And a friend of mine one day asked me to come to lunch with somebody that he thought I would enjoy when I was visiting New York. It turned out to be the head of Earth Day International. And he said, "Why don't you tell her your vision about Times Square?" And I did. And she kind of laughed and said, "Well, you don't have any money, you don't have any technology, but it's a wonderful dream." Well, 2 months later, she called me and she said, "You know that thing that you were describing, can you do it? Because we've been given screens on Times Square for Earth Day. And if you can really pull it off, we'll give you these screens." And I immediately said, "Of course I can do it." And I had no idea how. And I had no idea really where any money would come from. One thing led to another. Someone handed me a check over lunch. And for $10,000, we were able to be on 13 screens in Times Square, broadcasting this message. And people could text to give, and we would, on their cell phones, and we would plant 5 trees in Kenya. Then that also sort of, mobilized a lot of people who sort of joined in. I got to, once again, for whatever it's worth, take the mic and try to tell people that regeneration was the way to go. Mostly, again, nobody was particularly listening, I don't think, this is 2011. As much as I could, I began to bring in, sort of my media chops, such as they were, even though I wanted to leave media and do nothing but plant trees. I, use what you've got. And excuse me, this came about because I had a dream one morning, and it was the words, I don't know, sort of like a poem. It seemed vaguely religious. I sent it to a friend of mine who was a Episcopal priest. He turned out to be one of the principal officers of both the Charter for Compassion and also the Parliament of the World's Religions. One thing led to another, and I was able to deliver a talk to 10,000 delegates to the Parliament of World Religions from 80 countries and 50 faith traditions on restoring the tree of life that all religions have in common. and to try to help to mobilize the eco-spiritual dimensions that are inherent in every religion. And I think this was just before Laudato Si, or maybe when that came out, a great eco-spiritual doctrine. So this is, of course, another movement that's rising very powerfully, and I'm doing what little I can. Anybody who's interested in this charter, I'd be happy to send it. And sorry, this is that again. And then I got to assemble an international children's choir to sing a song that an old friend of mine, Alan Menken, who wrote most of the Disney movies, Beauty and the Beast, Little Mermaid, Pocahontas, and probably 4 or 5 others. And he sat down and wrote a song for us called Tree by Tree by Tree, meant to be sung by children's choirs and around worldwide, a project I'm still working on and trying to get going. But I did get to have these children perform it for the Parliament of the World's Religions, and it was very affecting. So again, this element of music and art, I think, is a very powerful way to communicate, and also children. And I'll add that show I referred to back when that I did for Turner, it was all children. So I think that sort of beginner's mind and innocence of the child in all of us is what's going to get us through. And another project that has recently started called the Compassion Tree Project is a collaboration with the Charter for Compassion and these 450 compassionate cities that was completely derailed, of course, like everything was by COVID, but we will be starting that up again. So that's just sort of a glimpse. And then we've done convenings. We did this in San Francisco, 500 leaders of the what we call the regenerates, the leaders of the regenerative movement that we just sort of hypothesized was evolving, obviously, as I think all of us know who are here, or if you don't, I'll tell you, it's a global movement. Everybody was very shocked to find out there were so many other people doing it. And it's an extraordinary asymptotic velocity to this regenerative movement. And I came up with this formulation, but I'll bet other people have too. But, it felt like I did, called the Regenerative Society, to sort of encompass this idea that it's not just about trees, it's not just about food, it's not just about whatever peacemaking and ecology and conservation, but it's what is a regenerative society? How do we build that? How do we live in that? How do we create that in our own lives? And that has really started to take hold as an idea in Kenya, to the point that we're now talking to government officials, people in the President's Innovation Office, the National Minister for the Environment, and some of these elements of a 100-slide plan that I created to suggest what it would be like to do regeneration at the level of statecraft and state policy. And if we can do this in Kenya, Kenya is one of the leaders of a 23-nation new common market. Nairobi is the Silicon Savannah. It's a center of technology and finance. And, really an extraordinarily influential country. And so if we're able to get this going, which I'm hoping, but again, COVID has interrupted everything, it will have an enormous effect. So this is, again, kind of how what one seed grows. And this actually took place at a meeting in Switzerland, where, again, I will tell you flat out, I have very little in the way of funding, but one night I'd heard about this meeting and I wanted to go, and I was talking to a friend in Germany, and she said, well, you know how to do this, just conjure it up, imagine, ask, whatever. It was 2 a.m. At 6 a.m, I got an email from a friend who I told about a conference that I wanted to try to create in Switzerland on regeneration. And he suddenly had the impulse to call me and offer me a check. And off I went. I don't think it's necessarily the best system, by the way. It'd be nicer to be more organized and salaried and know where the funding's coming from. But I'm just saying, I'm saying it not to give you gee whiz, aren't I a good magician? I don't think I am any better than anybody. It's just a matter of kind of entering into this place of sort of trust and openness. And it is amazing what that seed will grow. And really, this has been an ongoing experiment, I think, in is it really possible? Is it really possible to, how much congruity is there between the inner world, the spiritual world, the world of dreams, the world of consciousness, and the world? And I think, as a lot of us know, it's an enormous null set, if not really identical in the way that Jung and the alchemists talked about it, that it's unus mundus, it's one substance. It should be, I'm hoping, a very empowering story for all of us. So again, this idea of the world's first regenerative society. One key piece of that regenerative society vision is the Moringa moonshot, and I'm probably going to run out of time soon, so I don't want to go into this too deeply, but suffice it to say that when I was in Ethiopia, in 2007, I learned about the Moringa tree, which I'd never heard of. Some of you might. It's a superfood tree. It's drought tolerant. It grows on degraded land. The leaves are 30% protein, all amino acids, lots of nutraceutical and medicinal properties. So I've assembled a collaboratory from Rutgers, UC Davis, Hebrew University of Jerusalem, several African universities, and we're going to try to really see if we can fulfill the potential of Moringa to create a value chain, a supply chain that is truly regenerative. Because really, in this world, if you rack your brains, you don't find too many regenerative businesses. A lot of sustainable businesses are at this point, and businesses that give back. But how do we create something that from its inception and outset and its very operations is regenerative? And I think that Moringa as a keystone species, along with African indigenous vegetables for these perennial agroforestry and agroecology systems, could be that, because there's a lot of value in Moringa, potentially income. For smallholder farmers, and it's a high value crop. And it also can be used for a more concentrated kind of protein. So the world is going to need plant protein, and quinoa isn't going to do it, and soy is not particularly good for the environment, and neither are peas. So I will just editorialize for a minute and say I think it's Moringa. I'm going to do everything I can to inaugurate and instantiate this in not only the agricultural system, but the economic system. And this came about because we introduced the trees into the schools. The kids began to teach their parents. The communities began to grow it. And we have 150,000 at least of these trees now. People are pressing it with hand presses that we donated into oil. They're mixing the oil with coconut oil. That is something we introduced so that coconut trees would be worth more standing than cut down. And the coconut oil is being, that was a press to mix maize powder and moringa powder. This is the coconut oil mixed with moringa. It turns out that, and I know you can't read this, it's very dense, but moringa also can address some of the comorbidity factors of COVID. So we're trying to amp this up in Kenya, which is suffering greatly, and see where that leads. This is a project with UC Davis. There are ways to scale. We have 25 different partner organizations in Kenya, including the Red Cross. Again, moringa grows where things are most dire. So how could this be scaled? The big question. This is Carolyn Dama, our brilliant country director. It's her and maybe 15 people that are doing all this with these 80 to 100 communities. I occasionally pop up and get a meeting at a high level. This was a meeting at the House of Lords with the chairman of the Commonwealth of Nations. An hour sit down to pitch regeneration in the Commonwealth, and basically nothing happened. So I think we're to some extent still on our own, looking at the 8 kinds of capital. Some of you are familiar with this model.
Marc, I have a question.
Which we have done. Oh, I'm sorry, are you speaking?
Can you hear me?
I'm not hearing you.
You can't hear me. This is not good.
I'm not hearing you.
Let me see. Can you hear me now?
I'll keep talking in the meanwhile. And
Marc, can you hear me? Hello?
No. So I can't hear you.
Okay, hold on one moment.
Okay. I think you're telling me probably my time's up. I'm going to very quickly, give me 4 more minutes. Okay. I just want to say that we're at a moment where the big money's piling in. I'm sorry to run out of time. I didn't realize I'd go on so long. But it's starting to pile in. This is Indigo Carbon. They just raised $360 million for a carbon credit system to encourage regenerative farming practices. Nori is selling carbon credits. People are talking about drone technology to plant 1 trillion trees. This is Tom Chi, and some of you have heard of him and his work. Other people are talking about it. There are systems of how do you measure, how do you keep an eye on things from geoinformation services and be able to monetize regeneration through being able to measure it. We are about to do a project where, again, we've convened a collaboratory, several universities around the Sentinel-2 Copernicus satellite that'll include blockchain, a way of crowdfunding regeneration that I don't have time to go into. But this morning I woke up and I dreamed about a polar bear. I don't usually dream about polar bears. And in this dream, a mother polar bear came to me, and I was sort of camping out somewhere in a cave. And it was dawn, and she woke me up very gently. I know these are hypercarnivores, but in this dream, very gently, laid her paw on my chest, and she was saying goodbye, and she was going with her 2 cubs. And I woke up feeling so sad. And I felt like this was something that I had to mention, that, you know, the sense of our connection with this unfolding tragedy on our planet and the creatures we inhabit it with. And this made a tremendous impact on me today. I'm still a little bit teary thinking of it. It's enough, of course, to bring all of us to tears. This is Boulder, where I lived for 40 years. This was sent to me last night. And of course, this is happening from Siberia to the Arctic Circle above Scandinavia. The world, in very simple terms, is gotten hot and it's burning. And it's really up to us to not just stabilize the climate, but reverse climate change. And I think only regeneration is capable of doing that. So everybody in this room is a seed. Everybody in this room together is really the hope of this planet in this time of great crisis and great opportunity. So I would like to just say, let's regreen the world.
Thank you so much for that incredible download and for the work that you are doing in the world and for being so led by your heart and just creatively coming up with ways to make this happen. It's really inspiring. Thank you so much.
Sorry for such a long presentation.
Well, you're up to a lot of work. I can understand that it's hard to condense it down into a short format, because this is a lifetime's worth of work, and sometimes explaining that in an hour can be tough.
Thank you.
So before we wrap up, we do have 2 quick questions that the audience would love to ask you. And just again, to keep in mind, we have gone a bit over time. So if I can't ask for the essential oil version, just a really essentialized drop of the answers. So the first question is, Marc, what amount of resources do you need annually to run and expand your programs and to facilitate early stage investing in regenerative ventures that secure local and circular economies?
Yes, well, I can tell you that we had a venture in Nigeria, for example, we were doing with the former chief operating officer of Kraft Foods. That was quite enormous. It was almost the whole Igbo state province, and that was, I think, a $3 million startup to create this regenerative industry. We run on about 60,000 a year now. It's completely inadequate. This year we had 120,000 through some donations in London, but we need. I mean, honestly, I think we could. Responsibly absorb about $5 million. 500,000 is good. $1.5 million is good. We will make do with pretty much any amount, but it includes things like the Moringa Moonshot, which is also R&D. It's a very hard dollar to get. So we need, blended finance also, where maybe a foundation comes up with, a grant that might be convertible into some sort of investment. And then impact investment can come in on the tail of that. But anybody that wants to talk to me about this is what we're trying to do this year. We're ready to scale. We need to scale. It's a wonderful question, and I hope somebody steps up and helps us with this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we wish you the absolute best of luck, and you're up to amazing work, definitely. And again, it's very inspiring to see how resourceful you've been to be able to work on that budget and accomplish so much. So the final question is, among this group, we are preaching to the converted. However, in our modern world, most people are completely disconnected from the magic of the natural world. What can we say or do to plant a seed of regeneration and reconnection to nature in the modern mind of the disconnected?
Yeah. Well, you can see I've been waving my arms around with media. I'm not sure how much good that's done or not. I think it's community based. Regeneration is inherently local, and in every community there are seeds of regeneration. Every community, whether it's teaming up with a local arborist, finding some abandoned land, making a community project out of biodiverse plantation, getting into schools, not always easy to do, but extracurricular activities. We want to help with that, actually. And I think that one of those projects that I mentioned, the Compassion Tree Project, would have a base of 450 cities that are part of the Compassionate Cities movement. There are 2,000 schools that are part of that network. I think that demonstrating it and then talking about it in a way that's not just scaring people about the environment, obviously that doesn't in the end work. It raises a lot of funds maybe for an organization, but it doesn't help in the end. It doesn't evoke creativity and community. Yeah, I mean, I again, I don't have time to go into it, but I think the very shorthand would be start where you are. I'm just sort of saying that about this long-winded story that I've told today. Is it just started from just that? Like, there's got to be something. It's got to be something, and if I'm open to it, I'll trip over it, which is literally what's happened a couple of times.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the work that you're up to in the world and for being here today. We really appreciate your presence. Thank you so much, Marc.
Thank you so much.
What an inspiring example of creating change in the world from our inspiration. That was amazing to hear all of the creative, resourceful ways to bring this change out and to really help people become empowered in their own lives. So before we end this session, I just want to set the context with everyone that we are here gathered in this space to amplify and uplift voices of people who are making positive, regenerative changes in the world, and being able to hear of their stories and how we can learn about what they're doing and also contribute to their projects and really become empowered as change makers in our own lives. And this is all very much possible because of all of you generous supporters being here and donating. Thank you for your contributions. I also want to say thank you so much for the people who were able to contribute more than the suggested 25. You are helping us create more accessibility so that this knowledge is available to everyone, and we appreciate you so much. And the Academy intends to continue holding events of this nature and also deepening into educational curriculum. And we very much appreciate your support. And so I encourage you to donate. There is a donate button at the bottom of the screen. And we have so many programs that are just on the horizon, ready to come up, both in the educational realms of ethnobotany, furthering the mystery schools, different therapeutic models and whatnot, as well as knowledge preservation projects. We have an upcoming project where we are helping local herbologists in Iquitos in the Amazon to categorize all of the amazing plants that they know, really helping to preserve the knowledge of the Amazon. And so all of these projects are possible with funding. And so I very much encourage you to support what we're up to. We appreciate it so much. If you would like to make a more substantial contribution, or if you would like to offer a grant, you can email us at collaborate@mckenna.academy. And just want to say thank you so much. We're all collectively carrying this movement together, and we appreciate you so deeply. If you want to find more of Marc's work, which please do, he's up to such great good in this world. You can find him at www.greenworld.org, and definitely check out his projects and support him as well. He's up to incredible good.